The sun peeked over the horizon. It was a beautiful day. Birds chirped, dew sparkled on the grass. Our story begins with a deaf goat herd named Giles. Giles loved his goats. He loved the peace of the meadow. Every morning, Giles woke up early. He would milk his goats. He would make cheese. Then, he would gather his goats. He led them to the meadow to graze. Giles hummed a happy tune. He couldn't hear it, of course, but he felt the vibration in his chest. That was enough for him. Today was a good day, or so he thought. The sun climbed higher in the sky. Giles's stomach rumbled. He patted his pockets. Empty! He'd forgotten his lunch. Giles groaned. He was a hungry goat herd. He looked around the meadow. A shrub cutter worked nearby. Perfect, thought Giles. He would ask the shrub cutter to watch his goats. Then he could run home for his lunch. Giles approached the shrub cutter. He gestured wildly. He pointed at his goats. Then he pointed towards home. Finally, he rubbed his stomach. He hoped his message was clear.
What do you want?
The shrub cutter frowned. He didn't understand Giles's gestures. He only saw a strange man waving his arms. Of course, Giles couldn't hear him. He smiled broadly. He patted the shrub cutter on the shoulder. Giles thought the shrub cutter had agreed to help. He turned and ran towards home.
Hey, get back here! I didn't say I'd watch your goats.
But Giles was already gone. He didn't hear a word. Giles arrived home, out of breath. He found his wife in bed. She was sick. Oh dear, he thought. He quickly fetched her some water and medicine. Then, he grabbed his forgotten lunch. He kissed his wife on the forehead. He rushed back out the door. He needed to return to his goats. He hoped the kind shrub cutter was still watching them. As he ran, he passed a young boy. The boy was mute. He communicated through sign language. Giles, however, didn't understand sign language. He just waved cheerfully as he ran past. Meanwhile, back in the meadow, things were getting complicated. A sly-looking man approached the shrub cutter. This man was a horse thief. He was looking for an easy target. The horse thief saw the goats. He saw the shrub cutter. He assumed the shrub cutter was the goat herd.
Nice goats you have there,
the horse thief said, eyeing them greedily. The shrub cutter was confused.
What are you talking about?
He asked. The horse thief chuckled.
Don't play dumb. I'm willing to pay a good price for those goats.
The mute boy, who had seen Giles run past earlier, arrived at the meadow. He saw the horse thief talking to the shrub cutter. He knew something was wrong. He tried to warn the shrub cutter. The boy waved his arms frantically. He pointed at the horse thief, then at the goats, then shook his head vigorously. Unfortunately, the shrub cutter was just as clueless as before.
What is this mime day?
The shrub cutter muttered, scratching his head. He had no idea what the boy was trying to say. The horse thief just smirked. This was working out even better than he had planned. Just then, Giles returned. He was relieved to see his goats still grazing peacefully. He beamed at the shrub cutter.
Thank you.
He shouted, even though he knew the shrub cutter couldn't hear him. To show his gratitude, Giles decided to give the shrub cutter a gift. He grabbed a plump goat and led it over to the bewildered man.
Here you go, my friend.
He exclaimed, gesturing for the shrub cutter to take the goat. The shrub cutter, already confused by the mute boy and the horse thief, was now utterly baffled.
What am I supposed to do with the goat?
He sputtered, backing away from the offered animal. The horse thief saw an opportunity.
He's giving you the goat as a bonus.
He interjected, winking at the shrub cutter.
See, I told you he was a generous fellow. Now, how about we make that deal?
The shrub cutter was starting to feel like he was trapped in a bad play. He glared at the horse thief, then at the mute boy, who was still frantically signing, then at Giles, who was looking at him expectantly.
I don't want your goat. I don't want your money. And I certainly don't want to be part of whatever this crazy charade is.
He finally burst out, throwing his hands up in the air. The horse thief, sensing his plan was falling apart, decided to cut his losses. He quickly mounted his horse and rode away as fast as he could. The mute boy, Seeing the thief fleeing, let out a frustrated yell. Giles, still oblivious to the chaos he had caused, was confused by the shrub cutter's outburst. He tried to explain himself, but of course, it was no use. He couldn't understand why the shrub cutter was so upset.
I've had enough of this meadow, this goat, and this whole bizarre situation.
The shrub cutter, fuming, stormed off in the opposite direction. He just wanted to be left alone to cut his shrubs in peace. The mute boy watched them all go, shaking his head sadly. He thought about how difficult it was to communicate, even with words. People misunderstood each other all the time. He sighed. Maybe silence wasn't so bad after all. Giles, left alone with his goats, finally sat down to eat his lunch. He was still confused by the events of the day, but the sun was warm, the cheese was tasty, and his goats were content. And that, he decided, was all that really mattered. So, the day ended as peacefully as it began. The deaf goatherd's misunderstanding had caused a great deal of confusion, but ultimately, it was just another day in the meadow. A day full of laughter, frustration, and the simple joys of life.